Okay, so you ready to talk Jersey Devil?
Oh yeah. Let's dig into it.
Because we are going deep on this one for this deep dive. We are unpacking some articles on the Jersey Devil legend, and trust me, things get really interesting when we connect this thing to history, social movements, and even reproductive rights.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these sort of these figures of folklore can really act as like a window into, kind of like the anxieties and the social currents of a particular time and place.
Absolutely. So to set the stage, for anyone who hasn't heard the, campfire stories, right? What is the basic story of the Jersey Devil? Like the one everyone seems to know.
So the legend says that back in the 1700s, deep in the heart of the Pine Barrens, there was this woman. She was known as Mother Leeds, and she had a lot of children.
Okay.
Some stories say 12, some stories say even more.
Okay, 12 children. I'm already starting to understand Mother Leeds' supposed frustration, right?
Right. So the story goes that when she finds out that she's pregnant, yet again, she cries out, "Let this one be the devil."
Now, I'm not saying I relate, but, I can understand the sentiment.
Yeah, and according to legend, those consequences were very real.
Mm-hmm.
Mother Leeds gives birth to this monstrous creature. It's got a horse's head, bat wings, hooves, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
This creature then flies up the chimney and disappears into the Pine Barrens.
Yeah.
And people have been spotting it, or claiming to anyway, ever since.
So we've got a creepy creature, we've got a cursed birth, and we've got, the vast, mysterious Pine Barrens as this backdrop. It's no wonder that the story stuck around. But you're saying there's more to it than just a spooky story around a campfire.
Well, so this creepy legend that we're talking about, it might have roots in an actual family.
Mm-hmm.
Some scholars suggest that this whole Jersey Devil thing might be connected to a real family called Leeds, who actually lived in the Pine Barrens back in the 1700s. And there was a woman, Deborah Leeds, who did in fact have 12 children.
That's a lot of kids, especially for that time period. And what's so fascinating to me is that during that time, superstitions about birth defects and witchcraft were incredibly common. Like, imagine the stigma surrounding a child born with any sort of physical difference back then.
Yeah, a monstrous birth, as they might have called it back then, could be seen as a sign of a curse, a punishment from God, evidence of witchcraft even.
Yeah, that context is really helpful. So we have this legend, likely rooted in a real family, amplified by, the anxieties of the time. But you mentioned that it really took off in the 1800s. What was going on then that would make the Jersey Devil such a sensation?
Well, the 19th century was a time of major social and political upheaval. And one of the really big issues that was being debated was abortion.
Abortion. I have to admit, that's not the first thing that comes to mind when I think about the Jersey Devil.
Right.
But I guess it makes sense when you frame it around, the story of an unwanted pregnancy.
Precisely, and this is where things get really interesting. In the early 1800s, abortion, especially early in a pregnancy, was a fairly common practice. Women, particularly poor and unmarried women, relied on traditional remedies. They used herbs, things like that, to control their fertility and manage their families.
So it was a very different time from today in terms of how people viewed abortion.
Oh, exactly. But as the 19th century progressed, we start to see a shift. The medical profession, which was becoming increasingly powerful at the time, really started to campaign against abortion. And this was a male-dominated field that was looking to outlaw abortion and establish its authority as the regulators of women's bodies and their reproductive health.
So you have this clash then between the traditional practices often led by women like midwives and then this rising medical establishment that's looking to exert its control.
Yes, and this campaign against abortion, it wasn't just about medical concerns. It became very much intertwined with these social anxieties and these attempts to control women's lives. Midwives, traditional healers, they were demonized, accused of performing these dangerous and immoral procedures. And they used this concept of, and this is a term you might find interesting, gyna horror, to frighten people, to make them think that women's bodies, their reproductive choices, were inherently dangerous and needed to be controlled by, these men of medicine.
Can you maybe elaborate on gyna horror a little? Because I've actually never heard that term before.
Yeah. So essentially it was a way to instill fear and disgust around, women's reproductive systems. So, for example, if you look at medical texts from that era, they often depicted female anatomy in these grotesque and exaggerated ways. They were portraying menstruation, childbirth as these horrifying and dangerous processes.
Wow.
And this effectively created this atmosphere where anything related to female reproduction, including abortion, was seen as something to be feared and, again, controlled by men.
So how does all of this tie back to the Jersey Devil then?
Well, think of it this way. The Jersey Devil, this monstrous creature born from an unwanted pregnancy, becomes a symbol of these anxieties around women's reproductive choices. A woman cursed by pregnancy, her desperation, her anger. It's manifesting as this monster that terrorizes the community.
It's almost as if, like, the Jersey Devil is this cautionary tale, right,
Right.
about what happens when women are denied control over their own bodies and their reproductive decisions.
Exactly. Folklore. It often acts as a way for cultures to grapple with these taboo or difficult subjects. And the Jersey Devil, though never explicitly about abortion, becomes kind of like this coded message, right? Reflecting these anxieties about women's power, their sexuality, and the consequences of denying them control over their own lives.
I never would have thought that a spooky story about a creature in the woods could be so layered and so connected to, like, these larger social and political issues.
It's fascinating how these stories, they evolve and they resonate with different generations for different reasons.
Absolutely. And what's even more fascinating is that despite all these attempts to kind of erase these traditional practices, right, and to demonize women's choices, the story of the Jersey Devil, it persists. Even as the actual Pine Barrens like became less remote and more developed over time, the legend, it lives on.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, what is it about this story? This story with its centuries-old roots and these anxieties about like reproduction and women's autonomy, that still speaks to us today, especially given all the recent events surrounding reproductive rights.
Yeah, it's a really important question. And what I find so fascinating is that the themes at the heart of this Jersey Devil legend, right? This idea of bodily autonomy, reproductive control, access to safe health care, that's as relevant today as it was centuries ago, maybe even more so.
Yeah, it's kind of wild how like a story that's been passed down for generations can feel so incredibly timely right now. Yeah, and we can't ignore like the imagery in the Jersey Devil tale, right? Like this forced birth, this
Yeah.
monstrous birth. It's a stark reminder, I think, of what's at stake when those rights are eroded or denied.
Yeah, it's almost as if like the legend itself has taken on a whole new layer of meaning, especially in light of current events.
Right. For centuries, women have faced attempts to control their bodies and their reproductive choices, and I think this gets to the power of folklore, right? It reflects our deepest fears and anxieties, but also our hopes and desires for, agency and control. And the Jersey Devil, it kind of embodies this struggle, this fight for autonomy, for self-determination that continues to resonate with people today.
It's really given me like a whole new perspective on the Jersey Devil. So we went from a creepy piece of folklore to this like really fascinating discussion about reproductive rights, the history, the power of storytelling. What's like the takeaway here for you?
I think the takeaway is that these seemingly simple stories, they can have these hidden depths. They reflect these complex social and political realities. The Jersey Devil, it reminds us that folklore, it's never just about entertainment. It's a way for cultures to process these difficult emotions, to challenge norms, to grapple with the unknown.
And these stories, they can really spark these important conversations about issues that are still so relevant centuries later.
The Jersey Devil isn't just some spooky tale from the Pine Barrens, right? It's a cultural mirror, reflecting anxieties about women's bodies, about this fight for reproductive justice, the consequences of denying people control over their own destinies.
Yeah, this deep dive into the Jersey Devil really went to some pretty unexpected places. We covered reproductive rights, history, the power of folklore, and all from a spooky story about a creature in the woods.
It's amazing what you can uncover when you dig a little deeper.
It really is. Now, for you listening, we would love to hear your thoughts. If Mother Leeds had lived in a different time, a different place, with different choices, would the Jersey Devil even exist? Something to think about the next time you're in the Pine Barrens and you hear a strange sound at night. Just saying.